You did not leave the world all at once. You simply began to notice that the places you once managed to fit into now felt too small for the truth moving inside you. The room could be the same room, the voices could be the same voices, the table could still hold the same cups, the same polite conversation, the same old duties waiting quietly beside your name. But something in you no longer bent in the old way. Something that once softened itself automatically now remained still. And because of that stillness, you began to feel like a stranger in the life you had spent years adapting to. For a long time, you may have mistaken adaptation for belonging. You learned how to read the air before anyone spoke. You learned how to sense disappointment before it was named. You learned how to lower your own volume so the room would not have to become uncomfortable. You knew when to smile, when to explain, when to absorb, when to disappear into usefulness. And because you could do this with such quiet precision, the world called you kind, mature, understanding, easy to be with. It did not ask what it cost you to become so easy. The strange grief now is that you are not breaking in the way others might understand. Listen, you are not simply tired. You are not merely disappointed. You are not having a passing season of disinterest. What has begun to loosen is the inner arrangement that allowed you to belong to places that never truly received you. The old self knew how to survive rooms where love was mixed with tension, where closeness came with unspoken demands, where approval depended on your ability to sense what others did not want to feel. That self was intelligent, that self was devoted, that self carried you through, but it was built for a world that asked you to become less than you were. Now the same world looks at you and wonders why you are different. It may not say this directly. It may come as a small hesitation in someone's voice, a coldness after you stop over-explaining, a quiet confusion when you no longer rush to repair what you did not break. You may feel it in the pause after you speak plainly. You may feel it in the way certain people wait for the older version of you to return, as though your new stillness is a temporary failure of warmth. They do not know that what they are waiting for was not your whole self. It was the part of you trained to keep the room intact. And this is where the wound becomes difficult to name, because the world you adapted to may not have looked cruel from the outside. It may have looked ordinary: family dinners, workplaces, marriages, friendships, communities, small responsibilities repeated for years until they became your identity. You were not always struck by open rejection. Sometimes you were shaped by softer forms of absence, by people who loved your sensitivity when it served them, but did not know what to do with it when it asked to be honored. You became the one who understood, because no one knew how to understand you. In the language of the unconscious, one might say that you formed a persona around attunement, not a false mask in the cheap sense, not a lie you consciously told, but a necessary face the psyche created so you could stay connected to what mattered. You learned to appear calm when you were inwardly scanning. You learned to appear generous when you were inwardly empty. You learned to appear patient when something in you had already waited too long. This persona was not foolish. It was born out of need. It stood between you and abandonment. It offered you a place at the table, even if the chair was never truly shaped for your own body. But now the chair hurts. That is one of the quiet signs. The place you once occupied without question has become unbearable in ways you cannot always explain. You may sit among familiar people and feel your body withdraw before your mind has formed a reason. You may hear the same conversations and feel a strange distance, as though the words are arriving from another room. You may look at the same phone, the same messages, the same names appearing on the screen, and feel no impulse to respond with the old urgency. It is not hatred, it is not coldness, it is the body refusing to keep translating your soul into a language the old world can use. This refusal can feel lonely, because the empathic soul often learned to find safety through connection, even when the connection was uneven. To stop fitting the old world is not immediately freedom. At first, it can feel like exile. You may not know where to stand when you are no longer bending. You may not know who you are when your gift is no longer being spent on keeping others comfortable. You may feel guilty for the very peace that comes when you step back. You may wonder why silence feels both like relief and like loss. There is a grief hidden here that few will recognize. You are grieving the world you tried so hard to belong to. You are grieving the version of yourself who believed that if you became perceptive enough, gentle enough, forgiving enough, patient enough, then one day you would be met with the same depth you gave. You are grieving the years spent translating pain into understanding so others would not have to feel accused. You are grieving the old hope that adaptation would eventually become intimacy. And grief of this kind does not always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like staring at a cup of tea that has gone cold while your life quietly rearranges itself inside you. The old world may still call to you through obligation. It knows your old name. It knows the name of the one who answers quickly, the one who can feel what is wrong, the one who makes room, the one who does not disturb anyone with their own need. It may call through memory, through guilt, through the soft ache of wanting to be good, and part of you may still rise when it hears that call, because the body remembers before the soul consents. But another part of you remains seated now. Another part has begun to understand that being needed is not the same as being loved. This is not a simple awakening. It is not clean. It does not make you superior to the world you once fit into. It makes you more honest about the cost of fitting. There may be tenderness still in you for those who did not know how to meet you. There may even be love, but love is different when it no longer requires self-abandonment as proof. You can care and still feel the door inside you closing to the old arrangement. You can remember and still not return. You can understand why they are the way they are and still no longer offer yourself as the place where their unconscious pain comes to rest. Through a Jungian lens, this is the beginning of a deeper separation between the persona and the self. The persona asks, how must I appear in order to remain connected? The self asks, what is true even if connection changes? For years, your psyche may have lived closer to the first question. It had to. A sensitive person cannot easily remain unshaped by the emotional weather around them. You learned to become a kind of weather instrument, noticing pressure, et silence, tone, withdrawal, disappointment. But there is a moment when the instrument becomes weary of measuring storms it did not create. There is a moment when the soul asks to be more than sensitive to others. It asks to become faithful to itself. And faithfulness to yourself may feel unfamiliar, even ruder. That is how deep the adaptation went. A simple boundary may feel like betrayal. A quiet evening alone may feel like neglecting someone. Not answering immediately may feel like cruelty. Speaking without cushioning every word may feel as though you have become hard. But perhaps you have not become hard. Perhaps the softest part of you has simply moved inward, where it can no longer be handled by everyone. Perhaps what others call distance is really the first shelter your inner life has ever been allowed to have. There is a room inside you that has been too crowded for too long. For years, other people's moods sat there, their fears, their disappointments, their unfinished grief, their expectations of who you should be. You made space for all of it, often before anyone asked. You moved your own furniture to the corners. You kept the center open for what others brought. And now, when you begin to clear that room, it feels almost empty at first. The silence can frighten you. You may wonder whether you have lost your warmth, when in truth you are only discovering what your warmth feels like when it is not being constantly borrowed. The empath no longer fits the world they adapted to because the adaptation was never the full truth. It was a bridge. It helped you cross years you could not have crossed otherwise. But a bridge is not a home. You were never meant to live forever, suspended between your own needs and the demands of every wounded room. There comes a kind of exhaustion that is not asking for rest only. It is asking for an ending, not the ending of love, not the ending of tenderness, but the ending of the old contract that said your sensitivity must be paid out before it can belong to you. You may notice now that certain conversations leave you with a heaviness you once considered normal. You may notice that the body stiffens when someone begins to speak in the old familiar way, expecting your compassion to arrive before your discernment. You may notice that your face no longer forms the expression they are used to receiving. And then comes the strange shame of not being able to perform ease. You might think, what has happened to me? Why can I not just be how I used to be? Why does ordinary life feel so demanding now? But perhaps ordinary life was never ordinary for you. Perhaps it was a lifelong act of translation. The unconscious does not remove an adaptation gently just because the adaptation once protected you. It begins by making the old life feel unlivable, not always dramatically. Sometimes it begins as a lack of appetite for what once fed your persona. Praise does not reach as deeply. Approval feels thin. Being called kind no longer satisfies the part of you that wants to be known. Even being needed may begin to feel like a hand on your throat, not because the people around you are all unloving, but because the old role can no longer be mistaken for intimacy. This is the ache beneath the change. You are not only losing certain people, certain rooms, certain habits of emotional availability, you are losing a way of recognizing yourself. The one who could always adjust knew who they were, even in pain. The one who could feel everyone knew where to stand. The one who could soften conflict knew how to be valuable. But who are you when you do not immediately become useful? Who are you when you let a silence remain uncomfortable? Who are you when you no longer turn yourself into the bridge between people and the truth they avoid? These questions may not come as clear thoughts. They may come as fatigue. They may come as a sudden need to go home. They may come as a blankness when someone expects your old emotional labor and nothing in you rises. This blankness can feel frightening because it resembles emptiness. But sometimes the psyche protects what is newly forming by making the old response unavailable. It is as though an inner door has closed, not in anger, but in necessity. Behind that door, something tender and unnamed is trying to gather itself without being summoned by every familiar voice. You may feel that you have become harder to love, but perhaps you have only become harder to use unconsciously. There is a difference, and your soul knows it before your mind can defend it. The old world may not know how to love you without access to your adaptation. It may have known your listening, your forgiving, your sensing, your bending, your ability to make pain feel less alone. But it may not yet know the you who does not rush, the you who does not explain, the you who can sit at the table and leave the cup untouched if the conversation asks too much of your old wound. This stage can feel like standing at the edge of a life you built with great care, realizing that much of it was designed around not being abandoned. That does not make the life meaningless. It does not make your love false. It does not make your kindness a mistake. But it does reveal that the structure was incomplete. A house built only to shelter others eventually becomes cold for the one who lives there. And now you are feeling that coldness, not because your heart has died, because your heart has finally asked why it was always the last room to receive warmth. There may be no dramatic announcement. No one may fully understand what has shifted. You may still go to work. You may still answer certain messages. You may still wash the cup, close the door, sit in the same chair, listen to the evening move through the windows. But the old obedience has weakened. The old reflex has lost some of its authority. The world you adapted to may continue speaking in the same voice, but something in you has stopped translating that voice into a command. And because of that, you may feel both freer and more alone. This is often how the deeper psyche begins to return a person to themselves. Not with certainty, not with triumph, but with a quiet inability to keep betraying what has finally become conscious. You do not yet know the full shape of the life that can hold you. You may only know that the old shape cannot, and for now, that knowing is enough to make everything feel different. The room is still there, the table is still there, the chair is still there, but you are no longer sitting in it the same way. The change begins quietly enough that you may doubt it at first. You still recognize the room, the habits, the faces, the old emotional weather. Nothing outside has become strange enough to explain why your inner life now hesitates before entering. And yet there is a difference in the way you belong. You are present, but not fully available. You are kind, but not easily taken over. You can hear the old call, but it no longer reaches the deepest part of you with the same authority. For years, the world you adapted to trained you to mistake emotional access for closeness. If someone could reach you, move you, unsettle you, pull compassion from you before you had time to ask whether it was yours to give, then the connection felt alive. You may have known yourself through this responsiveness. You felt needed, and because you were needed, you had a place. You felt the shifts in others, and because you could respond to them, you became important. Not loudly important, not celebrated, perhaps, but essential in the hidden economy of the room. This is why the loss of the old role can feel so disorienting. It is not only that you no longer want to carry what you carried, it is that the carrying once gave shape to your identity. You knew how to move through life as the one who noticed, the one who adjusted, the one who could sense the pain behind anger, the fear behind control, the loneliness behind someone's silence. You learned to soften what others made hard. You learned to translate what others acted out. And somewhere along the way, Your own soul began to believe that this was love, but in Jungian terms, love and projection often become entangled in the unconscious. A person may not see you as you are. They may see in you the figure they need, the rescuer, the forgiver, the mothering presence, the quiet witness, the one who will hold what they cannot hold in themselves. And because your sensitivity could perceive the ache beneath the demand, you may have accepted the projection as a sacred duty. You may have felt that refusing it would make you unkind. You may have thought that seeing someone's wound meant you were responsible for becoming its shelter. The empathic adaptation often forms around this invisible exchange. You become the place where others deposit what they cannot face, not because you are weak, because you were perceptive enough to feel what was unspoken, and wounded enough to believe that responding to it might secure love. The old world rewarded this. It rewarded your patience. It rewarded your ability to stay calm when others were chaotic. It rewarded your carefulness, your emotional intelligence, your ability to make harsh things sound understandable, but it rarely asked whether you had become a person or a container. There is a difference between being deeply receptive and being endlessly available. The old world may not have taught you that difference. It may have praised you most when your boundaries were invisible. It may have called you mature when you swallowed disappointment without naming it. It may have called you strong when you did not ask for support. It may have called you peaceful when you were actually absent from yourself. And because praise can become a kind of bread to a hungry psyche, you may have lived for a long time on approval that never truly nourished you. This is why you may now feel such a strange resistance to the very things you once did naturally. A message arrive, and the body does not move toward it. A familiar person begins to explain their distress, and something in you remains quiet. Someone expects you to understand the deeper reason behind their behavior, and you cannot make yourself reach for that reason anymore. The mind may still know how, the old intelligence is still there, but the soul withdraws its consent. It is not that you have become incapable of empathy, it is that empathy has begun to return to its rightful place, no longer willing to be used as the bridge over which everyone crosses while you remain unseen. The hidden pattern was never only about kindness. It was about belonging. Somewhere in the early architecture of the psyche, you learned that attunement kept you safer than directness. You learned that sensing the room could prevent disappointment, rejection, punishment, withdrawal, or the coldness that arrived when you became too much. You may have learned that your own feelings were too inconvenient, too intense, too complicated, or too poorly timed. So you became elegant in your disappearance. You remained present enough to be praised, but not so present that your own truth would disturb the arrangement. This is not a small thing. To live this way for years is to develop an inner posture. The shoulders of the psyche lean forward. The ear listens for danger beneath ordinary speech. The heart prepares to understand before it prepares to protect itself. The face becomes skilled at offering warmth even when the inner child stands unheld in the corner. You may not have called it adaptation, you may have called it being yourself, but the self, in Jung's deeper sense, is not the same as the personality that learned how to be acceptable. The self waits beneath the arrangement. It does not shout, it waits until the arrangement can no longer contain life. And when that waiting ends, the old world begins to feel unreal. Not false exactly, but partial. You may look back on years of devotion, and realize how often you were loved through a role. Loved because you made the room easier. Loved because your sensitivity served as a cushion between others and consequence. Loved because you could absorb tension before it became truth. This realization can bring a quiet sorrow that has no easy place to go, because you may still love the people, the places, the old rooms, you may still understand them, but understanding them no longer returns you to the chair that hurt you. The psyche sometimes announces this shift through simple refusals. You cannot stay as long as you used to. You cannot laugh at what once made you shrink. You cannot explain your heart to someone committed to misunderstanding its language. You cannot keep offering your depth to a conversation that only wants your compliance. You cannot keep calling peace what is actually your silence. These refusals may not come with anger, they may come with a tired clarity. The kind that arrives after the soul has repeated the same lesson for too many years and finally stops performing surprise. In the language of the unconscious, this is the weakening of the complex. A complex is not just a memory, it is a living pattern of feeling, expectation, fear, and identity. It gathers around old wounds and begins to interpret the present through them. If your old wound taught you that love must be earned by sensing others, then every relationship may have become a stage upon which the same drama quietly repeated. You entered with the hope of being met. You left having managed the emotional climate. You told yourself it was compassion. Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was the complex asking you to repeat the old bargain because repetition felt more familiar than freedom. This is why the new life feels awkward. The complex has lost some power, but the new center has not yet become familiar. You may no longer fit the old world, but the new one has not fully received you either. That in-between place can feel like a hallway with no furniture. You cannot live there forever, but for a while, you may have to stand there and listen. Behind one door is the life where you are useful enough to be kept. Behind another is a quieter life where you are not always understood. But you are not constantly abandoning yourself. The second door may not open quickly. It may not even look impressive, but something in you recognizes it without needing applause. There is often a hidden loyalty that makes this threshold painful. Part of you may still feel devoted to the world that shaped you, even if it hurt you, even if it left you unseen, even if it asked too much and gave too little. The psyche does not simply abandon what once gave it survival. It grieves it. It circles it. It tries to return, hoping perhaps the room has changed. The chair has softened. The table has made space for your own cup. And sometimes you do return for a moment. You offer a little more. You explain one more time. You soften one more boundary. Then the old ache rises, not as punishment, but as memory. The body remembers what the mind wanted to forgive too quickly. This is where depth psychology becomes tender rather than theoretical. It does not ask why you did not leave sooner. It asks what part of you still believed you had to stay in order to be loved. It does not shame the persona. It understands that the mask once protected the face. It does not tear away the adaptation and call it weakness. It asks what loneliness stood behind it. It asks what terror of rejection required you to become so exquisitely attuned. It asks what child learned to read the room before learning to rest inside their own life. And perhaps this is why the word world in your life now feels so heavy. It is not merely society, not merely people. not merely the daily noise of tasks and expectations. The world you adapted to is the entire emotional system that taught you who you had to be. It is the family mood you learned to manage, the relationship where your depth became labor, the workplace where your reliability became a silent contract, the friendship where your listening was welcomed, but your truth created distance, the community where your goodness was measured by how little disturbance you caused. You adapted not to one person, but to a field of expectation. To no longer fit that field is to feel your own shape returning. At first, shape feels like resistance. You notice edges where there used to be compliance. You notice preferences where there used to be automatic agreement. You notice fatigue where you used to push through. You notice irritation. And it may frighten you because irritation was once forbidden. But irritation is not always a failure of love. Sometimes it is the first rough outline of a boundary that has not yet learned gentleness. Sometimes the psyche must say no in a voice it barely recognizes before it can later speak with calm. This does not mean every old connection must disappear. It means the old terms cannot remain unconscious. Some people may meet you again, more slowly, more truly, if they can bear the loss of your old function. Others may only know how to relate to the version of you that made them feel innocent, comforted, understood, or unchallenged. And when that version no longer arrives on command, they may experience you as distant, but their experience is not the whole truth. It may simply be the withdrawal of a projection. They are meeting the place where your soul no longer volunteers to carry their unfinished work. This is one of the loneliest thresholds for a wounded empath. You may still be able to feel the pain in others. You may still sense the frightened child behind someone's sharpness, the shame behind their control, the grief behind their need to be right. Your gift has not vanished, but your relationship to the gift has changed. Before, feeling someone deeply may have meant moving toward them. Now, feeling someone deeply may mean remaining where you are. This is a profound shift. It is the difference between perception and surrender, between compassion and self-erasure, between seeing the wound and becoming responsible for its consequences. The world you adapted to may not recognize this as growth, because it benefited from your confusion, not maliciously always, often unconsciously. The old arrangement depended on you not knowing where you ended. It depended on your tenderness being faster than your discernment. It depended on your guilt arriving before your anger could speak. It depended on your ability to turn pain into understanding so swiftly that no one had to sit with what they had done, what they had failed to give, or what they could not face. When that pattern changes, the system feels disturbed. But disturbance is not always harm. Sometimes it is simply truth entering a room that survived on silence. And still, there is tenderness here, because you did not become this way out of vanity. You did not choose sensitivity as an ornament. You did not become skilled at emotional weather because it was interesting. You adapted because some part of you understood that love, in your early world, had conditions that were not always spoken. You learned the conditions, you became fluent in them, you shape yourself around them with the devotion of someone who wanted to stay connected. There is something heartbreaking and beautiful in that. The same sensitivity that exhausted you also carried evidence of how deeply you wanted to love and be loved. But now the self begins to ask for a love that does not require disappearance. Not a perfect love, not a painless love, not a love without misunderstanding, but a love where your presence is not treated as an inconvenience, a love where your silence is not automatically filled with someone else's need, a love where you know does not erase your worth, a love where your body can sit in the chair without bracing for the next emotional demand. This kind of love may be quieter than what you once chased. It may not arrive with intensity. It may not flatter the old persona. It may simply leave room for you to exist without performing usefulness. That room can feel unfamiliar. You may not know what to do with space that is not immediately claimed by someone else's crisis. You may feel restless when no one needs you. You may reach for the phone without knowing why, drawn toward the old world like a hand returning to a familiar bruise. You may mistake calm for emptiness because your nervous system learned to equate intensity with connection. But beneath the restlessness, another awareness is forming. It is quiet. It is easily missed. It says, perhaps I am still here even when I am not needed. This awareness is small at first, but it changes everything, because once you feel even a brief moment of existing without being consumed, the old world cannot fully convince you that consumption is love. Once you sit alone with your own cup and realize that no one's mood is waiting inside it, something begins to settle, not completely, not permanently, but enough for the unconscious to understand that another arrangement is possible. Enough for the old persona to loosen its grip. Enough for the self to come a little closer to the surface. And when the self comes closer, life often becomes simpler and more difficult at the same time. Simpler because the false negotiations become harder to maintain. Difficult because you can no longer hide from what you know. You know when you are shrinking. You know when you are performing warmth. You know when your yes is a plea for belonging. You know when you are being invited back into the old role. This knowing may not make you graceful immediately. It may make you tired. It may make you quiet. It may make you less impressive to those who loved your old capacity, but it is still a return. You may wonder why this return does not feel happier, why finding yourself feels so much like losing the world. But perhaps every real return begins with the collapse of mistaken belonging. The soul must first stop confusing the familiar with the true. It must stop calling the old chair home just because it knows the shape of your pain. It must stop mistaking the table where you were useful for the place where you were received. And this takes time, because the heart does not release its old rooms, simply because the mind understands them. So you remain in the tenderness of the in-between, not fitting as before, not yet rooted elsewhere, still capable of love, but no longer able to pay for connection by abandoning the one who feels. This is a sacred discomfort, though it may not feel sacred while you are in it. It is the discomfort of a psyche withdrawing its energy from an old image of self, the image of the endlessly understanding one, the one who could belong anywhere by needing almost nothing, the one who could sense everyone and still remain unseen. That image once kept you safe enough. Now it keeps you small. A life can be built around an image for a very long time. Then one day the image no longer holds. Not because you have rejected everything, not because you have become unloving, but because the truth underneath it has gathered enough strength to disturb the surface. The cup in your hand becomes heavier, the chair becomes less forgiving, the old room becomes too loud, even when no one is speaking, and in that quiet disturbance, the unconscious begins to say what it has been saying for years in dreams. In fatigue, in sudden tears, in the ache after certain conversations. You were not made only to adapt. That sentence may enter you slowly, because adaptation was once how you protected love. It was how you remained near. It was how you made yourself understandable to people who could not meet the unedited version of your heart. But the fact that you can adapt does not mean you must become the shape of every room you enter. The fact that you can feel deeply does not mean every feeling is asking for your surrender. The fact that you can understand pain does not mean you must return to the place where your own pain was never given language. And perhaps that is the hidden mercy of not fitting anymore. The old world has lost the power to fully define you. It can still call, it can still ache, it can still pull at the familiar threads of duty and memory, but something in you has begun to stand apart from it, not with contempt, but with sorrowful clarity. You can see the room now, you can see the chair, you can see how long you sat there believing discomfort was the price of love. And once you see this, you may still sit for a while, but you no longer mistake the pain for belonging. The world you adapted to did not disappear. Its voices may still reach you. Its expectations may still know where to knock. But the knock is no longer the same as a command. And the old door no longer opens by itself. The old door no longer opens by itself. And this may be the first real sign that something deeper than preference has changed. You may still feel the knock. You may still know who is standing on the other side. You may still sense the familiar need, the familiar expectation, the familiar sorrow that once moved through you like a command before your mind had time to speak. But now there is a pause, a small, quiet space between the call and your response, and in that space, a part of you that was buried beneath years of adaptation begins to breathe. This pause can feel almost unnatural at first. You may not know what to do with it. The old self was immediate. It leaned forward, answered quickly, softened the edge, interpreted the pain, made room before room was made for you. The old self had no pause, because the pause once felt costly. A pause might disappoint someone. A pause might invite accusation. A pause might reveal that you had your own feelings, your own limits, your own private unwillingness. So the psyche learned speed. It learned to give before reluctance could become visible. It learned to understand before resentment could gather language. But now, the pause arrives like a threshold, not dramatic, not proud, just there. You stand inside it and feel how unfamiliar it is not to rush toward the old demand. You may feel guilt move through the body like cold water. You may feel an old tightening around the chest, as if love itself has been placed on trial. You may feel the child in you waiting for punishment, waiting for the face to change, waiting for the warmth to disappear. And yet, you remain still. Something in you does not cross the room as quickly as before. This is where the shadow begins to speak, not as an enemy, but as the part of the truth that had to remain unclaimed while you were still trying to be good. The shadow is not simply what is dark or shameful. It is often what was not permitted to belong to the person you had to become. Your anger may have gone there. Your refusal, your hunger to be chosen without being useful, your exhaustion with being understanding, your wish to stop interpreting pain on behalf of those who never asked what it did to you. These things did not vanish because you were kind. They waited below the kindness, gathering heat in the places where your persona could not admit them. And perhaps this is the deeper truth you have avoided because you did not want your own goodness to become complicated. The old role paid you, not with peace, not with true rest, but with a currency the wounded heart could not easily refuse. It paid you with belonging. It paid you with the feeling of being indispensable. It paid you with the quiet pride of being the one who could endure what others could not. It paid you with a kind of moral shelter. Because if you were always the understanding one, then no one could easily accuse you of being selfish, harsh, difficult, or unloving. This is not blame, it is tenderness with the lights on. The role was not only something done to you, it also became a place where your frightened psyche learned to stand. Being needed may have felt safer than being known. Being useful may have felt less exposed than being desired for your real self. Being the one who could feel everything may have given you a hidden authority in rooms where you otherwise felt powerless. You may not have controlled anyone outwardly. You may not have demanded anything, but sensitivity itself may have become a way of knowing before others knew, preparing before others spoke, managing the field, so abandonment would not arrive unannounced. This is a difficult recognition because it touches the dignity and the wound at the same time. You did not manipulate the world by being sensitive, but your sensitivity may have become the way you tried to keep the world from hurting you again. If you could sense the disappointment early enough, perhaps you could prevent it. If you could understand someone's anger deeply enough, perhaps it would not become rejection. If you could make yourself needed enough, perhaps you would not be left. The empathic gift, when shaped by old fear, can become a lantern held too close to every face, searching not only for truth, but for danger, for permission, for signs that love is still allowed. The shadow moment is not the discovery that you were false. It is the discovery that even your most beautiful qualities were asked to serve fear. Your compassion was real, but it was often carrying terror underneath it. Your patience was real, but it sometimes hid the belief that your own needs would make you lose everything. Your forgiveness was real, but it may have protected you from the unbearable grief of admitting how much you had been hurt. Your ability to see both sides was real, but perhaps it also kept you from standing firmly on your own side. And when this becomes conscious, something in you may feel ashamed. You may want to turn away from the thought that your goodness was entangled with need. But please listen softly here. Nothing living in the human soul is pure in the way the persona wants it to be pure. Jung understood that the psyche is not made whole by polishing the acceptable parts until they shine. It is made more honest when the rejected parts are allowed to speak without taking over the house. The shadow does not come to ruin your love. It comes to remove the lie that love required your disappearance. This is why you no longer fit. Not because the world has changed completely, not because you have become someone entirely new, but because the hidden bargain has become visible. You can feel the cost now. You can feel when your tenderness is being asked to return to servitude. You can feel when a conversation invites you to abandon your own knowing in order to preserve someone else's comfort. You can feel when an apology is expected from you before anyone has met the truth of what happened. You can feel when the old chair is being pulled out for you again, politely, familiar, waiting for you to sit down and call discomfort maturity. The body often knows this before thought can defend it. A slight heaviness when a name appears, a dryness in the throat when you are expected to soothe, a sudden wish to step outside, to breathe air that has not been filled with another person's unfinished emotion. These are not dramatic signs. They are not proof that anyone is wrong or that you are right. They are the body remembering the old agreement and quietly saying, "Not like this again." The body is where the soul first refuses to sign what the mind has learned to justify. There is sorrow in this refusal because the old agreement once held your world together. It told you who to be. It gave you a task. It made your suffering feel meaningful. If you were exhausted, at least you were necessary. If you were unseen, at least you were good. If you were lonely, at least you were the one who understood. The psyche can endure a great deal when pain has a role to inhabit. What becomes frightening is pain without the old story around it. When you stop adapting, you may have to feel the loneliness that adaptation was covering. This loneliness can feel older than the present moment. It may not belong only to the person who did not answer you, or the family that expected too much, or the friend who disappeared when your boundaries appeared. It may belong to the first time you realized that your inner life was too large for the room you were given. The first time you noticed that being sensitive did not mean being protected. The first time you understood that love could depend on how well you concealed the parts of you that needed love most. The present ache opens the ancient ache, and for a while they speak with the same voice. In that voice, you may hear accusations. Why did you let so much happen? Why did you carry so long? Why did you mistake crumbs for devotion? Why did you remain at the table when the chair hurt year after year? But the deeper psyche does not ask these questions with cruelty. It asks them the way a lantern asks darkness to reveal the shape of the room. It wants you to see what you could not see while you were still trying to stay attached. It wants you to understand that adaptation was not stupidity. It was the intelligence of a heart that did not yet know it could belong to itself. The old world may not welcome this understanding. Systems built around your adaptation may experience your wholeness as a disturbance. They may miss the version of you who did not pause. They may call your quietness distance, your clarity hardness, your limits pride, your need for solitude rejection, and because you can still feel their disappointment, the old temptation may arise. You may want to soften the truth just enough to be lovable again. You may want to return to the room, sit in the old chair, take the old cup in your hands, and prove that nothing has been lost. But something has been lost, and it is right to name it gently. The old innocence has been lost. The belief that understanding someone deeply would make them able to love you deeply has been lost. The hope that if you adapted long enough, the world would eventually adapt back has been lost. The fantasy that your self-abandonment would be noticed, honored, and repaid has been lost. These losses may ache. They may leave you feeling less radiant, less open, less willing to be moved by every sorrow, but they also return a piece of your life from the unconscious bargain that had been spending it without your permission. There is a kind of anger that may appear here, and it deserves a careful place. Not the kind that wants to burn everything down, not the kind that wants to make anyone small. A quieter anger, a grief-colored anger, the anger of realizing that you were trained to call your own absence love. The anger of seeing how often your empathy was welcomed while your truth was treated as too much. The anger of understanding that you spent years becoming readable to others while remaining unread to yourself. This anger is not the opposite of tenderness. It may be the guard that tenderness needed all along. For the wounded empath, anger can feel like betrayal of the self-image. The persona may tremble before it. You may think, I am not this kind of person. I do not want to become bitter. I do not want to lose my gentleness. But anger, when carried consciously, does not have to take your gentleness away. It can stand at the doorway and tell the old world that entry is no longer automatic. It can protect the room inside you long enough for softness to become yours again. Without this guard, your softness remains public property, admired by many, inhabited by no one. In Jungian language, the task is not to destroy the persona, but to free the soul from being trapped inside it. The one who adapted is still part of you. You do not need to hate that self. That self learned the rules. That self kept you close to love when love felt conditional. That self helped you move through rooms that might otherwise have overwhelmed you. But the adapted self must no longer sit on the throne. It must become one voice among others, not the only one allowed to answer. This is where the self begins to gather the rejected pieces. The part that says no, the part that wants to be chosen without performing, the part that feels tired before it feels generous, the part that knows when a room is asking for too much, the part that no longer wants to translate abandonment into compassion so quickly that the wound never gets to speak. These pieces may feel awkward when they return. They may not sound elegant. They may not know how to be welcomed. But they are not intruders. They are exiled citizens of your own inner world. One might dream, in Such à Passage, of returning to an old house and finding a locked room you had forgotten. Inside, nothing terrible waits. Only a chair turned toward a window, a cup left untouched, and a younger version of you sitting quietly, not angry, not relieved, simply waiting to be noticed. The dream would not need to explain itself. The house would be the life you adapted to. The locked room would be the part of you that could not join the old arrangement. The untouched cup would be the nourishment you kept preparing for others, while never sitting long enough to receive your own. The image may stay with you because it is not dramatic. It is ordinary, and that is why it hurts. Much of what wounded you may have been ordinary. The ordinary expectation that you would understand, the ordinary silence after you were hurt, the ordinary praise for being low maintenance, the ordinary way people returned to you when they needed comfort, but did not know how to remain when you needed truth. The psyche often hides its deepest sorrow in common objects. A chair, un coupe, à table, à door, the things that were present while you disappeared. And now, as these things become conscious, you may feel less able to participate in conversations that require your disappearance. Not because you are above them, not because you lack compassion, but because something in you has sat too long in the locked room. It does not want more interpretation. It wants presence. It does not want to be praised for endurance. It wants to stop being organized around endurance. It does not want to become useful in order to earn a place. It wants to find out what remains when usefulness is no longer the price of staying. This can make your life feel smaller for a while. Fewer conversations, fewer explanations, fewer emotional errands, fewer rooms where you can pretend to be at ease. The old world was large because it could enter you from every direction. The new world may feel narrow at first because it begins with a boundary. A boundary is like a doorway that opens slowly from the inside. It may seem to separate you from life, but sometimes it is the first architecture of a life that can actually hold you. Still, you may miss the old intensity. You may miss the familiar pull of being urgently needed. You may miss the strange importance of being the one someone reaches for when they are undone. This is not something to shame. The psyche grieves even the roles that exhausted it. The role paid you, and the payment mattered. To be needed is not nothing. To be trusted with someone's brokenness is not nothing. To be the one who can calm the room is not nothing. But it becomes too costly when your own soul must remain homeless in order for the room to feel calm. The deeper truth is that you were never wrong for wanting to be connected. You were never wrong for offering tenderness. You were never wrong for sensing pain and responding with care. The wound began where care became your permission to exist, where tenderness became a performance you could not stop, where understanding became the bridge you had to build every time someone refused to walk toward you. That is what is ending, not your empathy, not your love, not the luminous part of you that can feel life deeply. What is ending is the unconscious requirement that your gift must be spent before you are allowed to keep yourself. This ending may not be understood by those who only knew your gift as access. They may feel that you are withholding. They may say you have changed. They may wonder why the same words do not open you. They may stand at the old door and knock in the old rhythm, expecting the same immediate entrance. And you may feel the ache of not opening. You may feel compassion for their confusion. You may even feel the old ache to prove that you are still good. But deeper than that ache, another truth has begun to stand. You can love without becoming the room where love avoids itself. This is not a cold truth. It is one of the warmest truths the psyche can learn, though it arrives through grief. It means that your sensitivity does not have to be a public doorway. It means your capacity to understand can be joined by the capacity to remain separate. It means your heart can feel another person's pain without abandoning its own seat. It means the cup on the table can belong to you, and you do not have to pour it out every time someone arrives thirsty from refusing their own inner well. The world you adapted to may continue to invite your old self back. It may do so gently, it may do so through memory, it may do so through someone's sadness, someone's confusion, someone's disappointment, someone's inability to recognize the version of you that does not organize itself around them. And perhaps you will not always respond perfectly. Perhaps some days you will open the door too quickly. Perhaps some days you will sit in the chair again and feel the old ache return through your bones. Even then, nothing is ruined. Consciousness does not demand perfection. It only makes unconscious return harder to mistake for home. This is why the path is slow. The psyche must learn not only that the old world was too small, but that the old world was also beloved. It held memories, it held parts of you, it held attempts at love, even when love was incomplete. You cannot tear yourself away from it without feeling the tenderness of what you once hoped it could become. You may need to mourn not only what happened, but what never happened, the conversation that never came, the recognition that never arrived, the apology that would have allowed your nervous system to rest, the simple sentence that might have made years of carrying feel less invisible. And yet, in the absence of that sentence, something else is being born, not loudly, not with certainty, something quieter than the old role, a self that does not need to be constantly translated into usefulness, a self that may still tremble, still ache, still reach toward familiar doors, but no longer forgets completely that it has a room of its own. This self may not impress the world you adapted to. It may not be as convenient. It may not be as endlessly warm on command, but it is more real. And after a lifetime of adapting, reality can feel severe before it feels kind. Let this severity have its dignity. Let the quiet no stand without being dressed as cruelty. Let the fatigue speak without being immediately corrected into gratitude. Let the anger guard the threshold without becoming the whole house. Let the grief sit at the table with you, not as proof that you failed, but as proof that something mattered. The old world mattered. The old self mattered. The years of adaptation mattered. And still, none of them are allowed to ask for your whole life in return. Perhaps this is what wholeness begins to mean here. Not becoming untouched, not becoming beyond need, not becoming immune to the ache of others, but allowing all of yourself to exist in the room, not only the parts that make the room easier, the tender one, the tired one, the angry one, the one who still loves, the one who cannot go back, the one who misses being needed, the one who finally wants to be known. When these parts are allowed together, the world you adapted to may feel even farther away, but your own inner house becomes less abandoned. And somewhere inside that house, the locked room is no longer locked. The chair is turned toward the light. The cup is still there, but this time it is not waiting for someone else's hands. The younger part of you does not need a speech. It does not need a lesson. It only needs the old adult self to stop walking past the door. The old role has not vanished. It has simply lost the right to answer first. The old role has not vanished. It has simply lost the right to answer first. And because of this, you may find yourself living in a quieter kind of uncertainty, where the old response still rises but no longer rules the room. You may still feel the familiar pull toward understanding, toward softening, toward making yourself available before anyone has truly asked whether you are well. But now another presence stands beside that pull. It does not shout, it does not accuse, it simply waits, and its waiting changes everything. This waiting may be the first shape of inner authority, not the harsh authority that demands you become unfeeling, not the brittle kind that mistakes distance for wisdom, something more inward than that. It is the authority of the self beginning to stand behind your life, no longer allowing the wound to speak as if it were destiny. You still carry memory, you still carry tenderness, you still carry the fine sensitivity that once helped you read the smallest tremor in a room. But now these things are being gathered into a deeper center, where they no longer have to scatter themselves at every knock. At first, this deeper center may feel like emptiness. You may sit alone and wonder why no great relief has arrived. You may have imagined that once the old pattern loosened, peace would appear quickly, as though the soul would instantly know how to live without the role that exhausted it. But the psyche is more faithful than that. It does not throw away what once protected it without mourning. It lets you feel the quiet after the old performance. It lets you hear the echo of who you used to be. It lets you sit at the table and notice that your hands are not reaching for everyone else's cup. This can feel strange. The cup remains in front of you, And for once, it is not a symbol of service. It is not something you must offer, refill, warm, carry, or place in someone else's hands. It is simply yours. And even this can feel difficult. To receive what is yours without immediately turning it into care for another may feel almost forbidden. You may not know how to sit with nourishment that has no audience. You may not know how to enjoy silence that is not waiting for a crisis. You may not know how to be present without proving that your presence is useful. But this unfamiliarity is not a sign that you have chosen wrongly. It is the feeling of a soul learning a language that was not taught early enough. The old language said, feel the room before you feel yourself. The old language said, respond before you reflect. The old language said, if someone is uncomfortable, your value is measured by how quickly you make their discomfort easier to bear. The new language is slower. It says, remain. It says, listen inwardly too. It says, not every ache outside you is an assignment. It says, your heart may stay soft without becoming a doorway. You may discover that softness itself changes when it no longer has to apologize for having edges. Your tenderness may become less immediate, but more truthful. Your compassion may become less performative, but more rooted. Your listening may become more selective, not because love has diminished, but because it has finally begun to include you. This is a quiet transformation, and it may not impress the old world. The old world often prefers gifts it can reach easily. It may prefer the empath who opens quickly, who translates everything gently, who can be entered without knocking twice. It may not know what to do with a warmth that has become housed. To be housed within yourself is not to be closed. It is to have rooms that are not public. It is to know that some parts of you are sacred, not because they are perfect, but because they are yours. There may be thoughts you no longer explain. There may be griefs you no longer hand to people who cannot hold them. There may be memories you no longer turn into stories just to make your pain acceptable. There may be love you feel deeply but do not act upon in the old way. This is not withdrawal from life. It is the end of offering your inner house to every familiar weather. And still, you may feel sadness when you notice who cannot meet you there. You may have hoped that once you became more honest, those who loved you would draw closer. Sometimes they will. Sometimes honesty makes a truer meeting possible. But sometimes your honesty reveals that the relationship was built around your adaptation more than your presence. This is a difficult grief because it does not always come with conflict. It may come as a quiet, fading, fewer words, less reaching, a sense that the bridge you once built has not been crossed from the other side. Let that ache be felt without turning it into a verdict against yourself. You are not too much because someone only knew how to love the part of you that managed them. You are not unkind because you no longer translate your exhaustion into patience. You are not cold because you have stopped giving immediate access to places in you that were never protected. What has changed is not the existence of love in you. What has changed is the old assumption that love must be proven by self-erasure. Through a Jungian lens, this is the slow work of individuation, not as a grand spiritual ascent, but as a return of the disowned life. Individuation does not always feel noble. Sometimes it feels like disappointing people you once tried desperately to keep close. Sometimes it feels like standing in a hallway after leaving a room that still contains everyone you used to please. Sometimes It feels like having no convincing explanation for your own quiet except the deep knowledge that returning would cost you something sacred. The self does not always arrive as joy. Sometimes it arrives as the inability to betray what has finally become visible. You may begin to see the old world with more compassion, not the kind that drags you back into service, but the kind that understands without surrendering. You may see that the people who needed your adaptation were often living from their own unconscious wounds. They may not have known how much they took. They may not have known that your gentleness was not endless. They may not have known that your capacity to understand was being mistaken for consent. This recognition may soften bitterness, but it does not erase clarity. Compassion does not require you to rebuild the old chair and sit in it again. There is a maturity in being able to say inwardly, I understand why this happened, and I will not continue it. That sentence may never be spoken aloud. It may live quietly in the body as a new posture. The shoulders no longer lean so far forward. The breath does not rush to become someone else's relief. The face does not automatically arrange itself into reassurance. The old door may still be there, but the hand that once opened it instantly now rests in your lap. A small gesture, perhaps, but a life can turn on such small gestures. This is how an old burden loosens, not all at once, not through a dramatic severing of every tie, but through moments when the old pattern expects your obedience and does not receive it, through moments when you notice guilt and do not let it choose for you, through moments when you feel another person's disappointment and allow it to remain theirs, through moments when you drink from your own cup before offering the rest of your life away. These moments are quiet. They may seem invisible to others, but the unconscious knows, the younger part of you knows, the body that once braced before every demand knows. It may take time for the body to trust this. The body may still prepare for the old consequence. It may still tighten when you say less. It may still tremble when you do not explain. It may still expect the warmth to disappear when you stop being easy. Do not rush this part of you into confidence. It learned from repetition, and it will learn safety through repetition too. Each time you remain with yourself without catastrophe defining you, something inside begins to update its ancient expectation, not because life becomes painless, but because you stop abandoning yourself at the first sign of discomfort. This is not the end of loneliness. Some loneliness may remain. A person who has spent years adapting may feel lonely when they stop translating themselves into the language of the room. But this loneliness is different from the loneliness of self-abandonment. The old loneliness was crowded. It happened while you were surrounded, while you were useful, while you were praised for your sensitivity and unknown in your sorrow. The new loneliness may be quieter, cleaner, more honest. It may leave space around you, and in that space, something that had been waiting behind the role may begin to take form. You may not know yet what that form is. It may not have a clear name. It may appear first as preferences, small refusals, a need for slower mornings, a distaste for conversations that circle around the truth without touching it. It may appear as a desire to create, to rest, to pray, to walk, to sit by a window with no obligation to become emotionally useful. It may appear as tears that do not explain themselves. It may appear as a love for simple things, because simple things do not ask you to disappear. A clean room, a warm cup, a quiet door, a chair that does not hurt. These images may seem ordinary, but the psyche often returns through what is ordinary. It does not always need a revelation. Sometimes it needs a place to sit. Sometimes it needs one evening where no one's demand becomes your identity. Sometimes it needs the permission to be unavailable to the old wound without becoming hard to life itself. You are not trying to become unreachable to love. You are becoming unavailable to the arrangement that confused love with access to your unguarded places. The empath who no longer fits the old world is not without belonging. They are between forms of belonging. The first belonging was purchased through adaptation. The next belonging must be shaped around truth. And truth does not gather people quickly. It does not perform. It does not flatter the roles others gave you. It may leave you standing alone for a while, not as punishment, but as a clearing, a place where your own life can finally be heard without the old noise rushing in to define it. In this clearing, the question is no longer, how do I return to who I was? That question may still visit you, especially on tired days, especially when memory becomes tender and the old room looks warmer from a distance. But beneath it, another question begins to form. What was I before I became so useful? What did I feel before I became fluent in everyone else's pain? What part of me waited while I was praised for needing little? These questions do not demand quick answers. They are not tasks, they are invitations from the unlived life. The unlived life does not accuse you. It does not stand before you saying you wasted everything. It knows why you adapted. It knows how young the wound was when it learned to become helpful. It knows how much love you were trying to protect. It knows that the old role, however costly, was once the best shelter you could build with what you had. But now it asks, gently and firmly, whether the shelter can be expanded, whether the house can include more than endurance, whether the table can hold your hunger too, and perhaps this is the quiet release that begins here. You do not have to condemn the old world in order to leave its unconscious terms. You do not have to hate the old self in order to stop being ruled by it. You do not have to prove your change to those who preferred your adaptation. You do not have to make your life understandable to everyone who benefited from your silence. Some things become sacred only after they stop being explained. There may still be days when you reach for the old response. You may answer too quickly. You may offer too much. You may sit in the chair again and feel the familiar ache, then wonder whether anything has truly changed. But something has changed because now you notice, and noticing is not a small thing. Consciousness is a lamp that cannot be unseen once it has lit the room. Even when you return with awareness. Even when you bend, some part of you knows the shape is not your home. Even when you soften, softness does not have to mean surrender. This knowledge will not make you perfect. It may make you more human, less polished, less endlessly agreeable, more capable of silence that belongs to you, more capable of tenderness that has roots, more capable of letting others meet themselves without rushing in as the interpreter. You may become harder to idealize and easier to know, harder to use as a projection, and easier to love in truth. Not everyone will welcome this, but the life within you has waited long enough for more than welcome. The old world may remain, the table may remain, the voices may remain, the door may still receive its familiar knocks, but you are not arranged around them in the same way. Something has moved inward and taken its seat. Something has gathered the cup, the chair, the younger self, the tired heart, the quiet anger, the tenderness that did not vanish. Something has begun to say, "This is my house too." And from that place, you may still love, you may still answer at times, you may still care more deeply than others can understand. But the care comes from a different center now. It no longer comes from panic disguised as devotion. It no longer comes from the belief that your place depends on being emotionally useful. It no longer comes from the old fear that if you are not needed, you will not be kept. It comes, when it comes, from presence. And presence is slower. It chooses. It remains connected to itself. This is why the world you adapted to may feel distant now, even when it stands close. You are no longer made entirely of response. You are no longer only the one who senses, absorbs, understands, and bends. You are becoming the one who can feel deeply and still remain. The one who can recognize pain without making it a home. The one who can sit in the room without becoming the room's caretaker. The one who can hear the knock and wait for the truth inside before opening. Nothing about this is simple. It does not erase the past. It does not return the years. It does not make every relationship whole. It does not remove the ache of what you wished had been different. But it changes the authority of the ache. The wound may still speak, but it no longer gets to name you completely. The role may still appear, but it no longer answers before the soul. The old world may still call, but its voice no longer travels through you as law. And perhaps that is enough for tonight. Not a finished healing, not a bright new identity, just the dignity of knowing that the adaptation which once carried you has begun to loosen its hold. You can sit quietly with that. You can let the room be quiet. You can let the cup remain warm in your own hands. You can let the door stay closed until something real, not something frightened, chooses to open it. The old role remained, but it no longer answered for you.
This has been Carl Jung Original, a space where the patterns most people live through can finally be named. Voice and imagery, AI assisted interpretation and framing, original work. Until next lecture.